As the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence come to a close this Sunday, a lot of workers, especially in the informal sector, are hopeful that the government will make good its promise of ratifying the ILO Convention C-190 that relates to ending all forms of violence and harassment in the workplace.
When President William Ruto committed to the ratification of 2 outstanding International Labour Organization conventions within 3 months, workers in informal employment were filled with hope that the law would safeguard their welfare. But as Mary Muoki reports, Kenyan workers will have to wait a little bit longer.
In his address at Nairobi's Uhuru Gardens during Labour Day celebrations, when President William Ruto promised to fast-track the ratification of the 2 outstanding ILO treaties on ending sexual harassment at the workplace and protecting the rights of domestic workers, those in informal employment were filled with hope. Hope that perhaps they too could enjoy a safe working space that will not dehumanize them in any way. One such hopeful employee was Jane Roswabwire, not her real name, who works at a flower farm in Naivasha. For 10 years now, she says she has slaved in the same position with no promotion, despite attending several interviews and meeting the criteria for a promotion.
Unapata saa zingine maua ni mingi na maybe tuseme mimi ndio niko pale kwa gate na search. Tena kwa upande ingine promotion kupata ni ngumu. Unapata mtu anakuja hata hajawahi fanya security, unapata huyo ndio supervisor yako. Wewe umefanya huko kama sasa hivi niko na 10 years and 11, huwezi ona unless ulale na mkubwa ndiye akupe.
Data from the Kenya Demographic Health Survey indicates that the number of people in employment in Kenya as of 2021 was 18.3 million, with an estimated increase of 900,000 new employees compared to 2020. Of these, 3.1 million worked in the formal sector, while 15.3 million of these worked in informal setups, requiring these protections, including ending sexual harassment at the workplace. The Act reads in part, acknowledging that gender-based violence and harassment disproportionately affects women and girls, and recognizing that an inclusive, integrated and gender-responsive approach which tackles underlying issues and risk factors, including gender stereotypes, multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and unequal gender-based power relations, is essential to ending violence and harassment in the world of work. National Gender and Equality Commission's technical working group, established by the Commission of Labour, is working on a mechanism to ratify the treaty, and Parliament is expected to adopt the ratification by March next year. The civil society has called on the government to fast-track its ratification to protect workers from continued exploitation in the world of work.
Gender-based violence, especially for women within the informal sector, is endemic. It's been, it's not like we are starting with these women just in the tea sector, and we cannot continue like this. It needs to be addressed. And, one of the ways that we need to address this is, through ensuring that we have the laws and policies in place to anchor this specific issue for people to be able to pursue justice, but specifically for the companies to be able to operate within the law. For as long as we don't have these, frameworks and, the legal frameworks and the laws in place, they will continue getting away with it.
The ILO Convention 190 recognizes the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment. C-190 also acknowledges that women, as well as other persons belonging to vulnerable groups, are at a greater risk and calls for the adoption of an inclusive, integrated and gender-responsive approach to prevent and end all forms of violence and harassment at work. The International Labour Rights Body calls for member countries to recognize the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment, and recognizing that violence and harassment in the world of work can constitute a human rights violation or abuse, and that violence and harassment is a threat to equal opportunities, is unacceptable and incompatible with decent work.
The women you spoke to represent a significant number of women in the informal sector who are going through the same thing. And for them to be able to pursue justice, they need to, have something to anchor, these complaints on. That the C-189 gives them that basis, to go with power and demand for justice. So if it's not ratified, it delays justice for them. So it needs to be fast-tracked, but also more specifically for the companies to put mechanisms in place to prevent this and, to manage this when it happens, and for the government to hold these institutions to account.
The first ever international treaty on violence and harassment in the world of work was adopted by the ILO in 2019, and to date, only 36 countries have ratified the treaty out of a possible 187 member states. Mary Muoki, Citizen TV.